Hey guys, I am Dr. Anthony Gustin.
And I'm Chris Irvin.
And here we are going to talk to you guys about lazy keto. We got some blowback from one of the previous videos that we posted about dirty keto versus lazy keto and what these things are. And people were not happy. So we just wanted to clear the air and make sure that you guys had the right information. So number one, we have a video about dirty keto and how we're not a big fan of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so dirty keto, if you guys haven't watched that video, is basically just consuming a ketogenic diet where you're not focusing on food quality. For most people, that's how you start a ketogenic diet. It's pork rinds, it's low quality meats, processed dairy, stuff like that. So that's what dirty keto is. That's something that we're not a huge fan of, but there is a difference between dirty keto and lazy keto.
Yeah, I think the term lazy keto is bullshit, to be quite honest with you. Yeah. It's something that people have coined. If you're not tracking your macros to the absolute single digit, then you're being lazy about keto, and I think that's trash.
Yeah.
So, I mean, a lot of the times we have this macronutrient profile that we just apply to the general population. So we have this idea of what worked for people who had epilepsy in the 20s, and then we say everybody should do that to be in a ketogenic state.
Yeah, and I think that's a big thing that we need to address, is that we really don't know what the most optimal macronutrient ranges are. Obviously we know that the core fundamental part of a ketogenic diet is keeping those carbs low, but the way that your fat and your protein are they can be adjusted depending on your goal and depending on the individual. And for us to just try to chase down these macronutrient numbers that have been set back, like he said, back in the 20s when we were trying to achieve a specific goal of helping people with epilepsy, it doesn't really make sense for people who are trying to use it for weight loss or improving cognitive function or increasing their energy. So when it comes to, if people who are stressing about tracking macronutrients, the point we're kind of trying to make here is that really we don't know what those numbers are supposed to be, so maybe there's not a reason to stress about them.
Yeah, and it's a very, very individual thing. So if you have a very old, overweight female versus a very young, lean male, those numbers are going to be very, very different. And so we can't just apply that to those people. And the thing is, people change as well. So like when I first started doing a ketogenic diet, what I got kicked out of ketosis on was completely different than now. Mm-hmm. And so I know how to approximate towards it. I know how I feel on keto, and I can tell with what I eat without having to track every single macronutrient, which is not, I think a great way to live. It's great so in the beginning how much, roughly this amount of steak is roughly this amount of protein, mm-hmm. and figure out what works for you as an individual, but keep doing it until it doesn't work, and then switch it up and find new tools that work for you.
Yeah, and I think that kind of brings up an interesting part about just like learning to eat intuitively. Any coach can sit down and give you guys recommendations. We can try to map everything out for you and you can follow it. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to see results. I think a better approach is for you to know what you're eating, kind of generally understand the macronutrient makeup of the foods you're consuming, and then learn how you can adjust either the amounts or the types of those foods to just test different macronutrient compositions and see how your body is adjusting. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be, every time you're having a meal, sitting at the table, tracking on your phone. That's definitely a stressor, and that's not something that we would recommend for having a high quality of life.
Yeah, and if you do want to track macros, I'm more of kind of like a generalized gram person instead of a percentage. So a lot of people think that 80% fat, 15% protein, 5% carbohydrate. Well, that doesn't tell you anything about overall amount. So if you're eating 10,000 calories in a day, that 5% of carbohydrates is actually a pretty high amount. And so what I like to recommend is just keeping your carbohydrates low, under around 30 grams or so. That usually does it. And then keeping protein at a minimum amount of 0.8 grams per pound of lean body mass, and then kind of filling in the fat anywhere with what makes you hungry or whatever works for your goal. Mm-hmm. So if you want to lose fat, probably keep that a little bit lower. If you want higher energy, probably keep that a little bit higher. And so it's a very individual thing, not only depending on your history, how fat adapted you are, but also your goals. And so if you don't have to track this stuff. You're not being lazy if you're not being a freak about your app and everything like that. So do not stress people who are doing lazy keto. You're just fine.
Yeah, and to kind of give you guys an example of that, like for me, when I first started a ketogenic diet, I was following those traditional macronutrient recommendations where it was like 20 to 25% protein and 70 to 75% fat. And that worked for a little while for me. And for some people, when you're starting out, that will work for you because you're making such a drastic improvement in your diet that regardless of what the macros are, you're cutting the carbs out, you're going to see some improvements. But over time, that doesn't necessarily continue. You don't continue to see those same results. So for me, I knew that my protein was too low. I wasn't achieving the goals that I was trying to accomplish. So I wanted to adjust that. And based off of what Dr. Gustin said, what I could easily do in that case is just know that there's certain protein sources that are a little bit leaner in fat, and they also have a little bit more protein in them. So switching to those sources can be a great way to just intuitively make those changes. You know, cutting out oils or adding oils depending on if you're trying to have more or less fat. There's just so many ways to do it where it doesn't necessarily have to be a negative or a lazy thing. It's just you trying to live a normal lifestyle that doesn't involve you tracking everything that you're eating.
Right. So, I mean, big tips. If you're eating real food and clean keto, not dirty keto, I think this helps a lot to kind of just figure out your body and what it likes. And you know, after that, it's a journey. So, I mean, buckle up and enjoy the ride, but you're not going to get it right the first time. Mm-hmm. Him and I have been toying with this, probably combined 10 plus years, and we're still figuring out new stuff. So I think just accepting that it's kind of a long-term thing to see what works for you, and that you're kind of building a toolbox where I know now that if I want to gain weight or lose weight or have high mental performance, I have all these different tools now how I can tweak my diet to reach that without even having to track macronutrients.
Yeah, and you know, it's so much different for everybody, and that's why just self-experimenting and tracking and seeing your results is going to be important, so you can figure out what tools you can have. You know, there's been no one person is this, or no two people are the same. I've had plenty of times where one person, you know, they're stuck at a weight loss plateau or something, and giving them more protein helped to get through it. And there's been other people where giving them more fats helped get through it. So it's so different, and that's why you're going to want to experiment. And you can, you know, like we said, you can do that intuitively without having to track.
Yeah. So if you guys have any more questions about lazy keto, dirty keto, clean keto, keto what?
Keto plus.
Keto plus, baby. Let us know in the comments below. You can reach me at Instagram and ask me any questions on there at Dr. Anthony Gustin, and
the Ketologist.
And we'll see you guys next time.